So as I say, if I didn't say clearly enough earlier, it's wonderful that for Krish, when he was just a young man at school, there was a little team of school workers that went in then, and Martin was one of those that really had a significant influence on Krish at that stage. Krish now is working for EA. Tell us a little bit about that work before you come to talk to us.
Sure. I think this microphone's going to work.
Yes. Welcome.
EA doesn't stand for the game company. It's the Evangelical Alliance. I know you were getting really excited then that I had 3 games with me this evening. I haven't. Evangelical Alliance has existed since 1846 because we believe the gospel draws people together. Whether you're Baptist, Anglican, Methodist or Free Church, we think the gospel is the most important thing that unites Christians. And so we would love it if Christians could make a positive impact on our whole nation. It was so exciting to hear what Marvin's doing locally. I kind of want to move to Bristol just so that I could vote for you, because I'd love to have you as my mayor. I hate the mayor we've got in our town. So, I mean, I love him. I just hate the fact he doesn't care about the poor. So it's so fantastic to hear what you're doing. So what you're doing at a local level across Bristol, we would love to see happen at a national level. What about if Christians stood up not just for the hot button issues, but actually we stood up for the rights of the poor and the marginalised? And so one thing that Evangelical Alliance is trying to do starting next year is a big campaign to get the churches to step up to the need of fostering and adoption. Let me give you a little for instance. Right now, there are 4,000 children in the United Kingdom who are waiting to be adopted. There's a little book that you can look through. It's called Be My Parents. And when you look through that, every week there are kids that are left behind, 4,000 of them. They're left behind because they're too old and people want a baby to adopt, or they've got a sibling, or they've got some special needs. 4,000 children waiting for adoption. There's also 8,000 more foster placements needed in the UK. 8,000 families that could offer a safe space for children to be in while they wait to find out their future. Now, that's too much for this church to handle. You're a fantastic, enormous, brilliant church. 5,000 burgers in 70 minutes. Love it. Fantastic. But I'd love to see you try and adopt 4,000 children and find 8,000 more foster placements. The only way we could do that is if we got together. Evangelical Alliance and Care for the Family, we're in touch with 15,000 churches. If your maths is any good, you'd know that's less than 1 family per church supported, encouraged to do fostering and adoption, and we've met the current need. Think about the impact that would have on those children coming through. Most of them, if they don't get adopted, the statistics are pretty bad about their life outcomes. Sadly, many of them will end up homeless. Some of them will end up in prison. A lot of them dealing with abuse issues. Wouldn't it be great if the church in the UK was known as the most hospitable, compassionate family that took in the children that nobody else seemed to want? That's something we can do together. That's why I'm part of the Evangelical Alliance, because together we're better. We can make a difference. One other thing that we're doing that may be of use particularly to this age range, I suppose, many of you in your 20s or late teens or early 30s, is you are the missing generation. This is amazing. This is a mere miracle. You're like the sighting of a dodo. Seeing young Christians who are passionate for God is really exciting. You can go to vast swathes of the UK and there are no 20s and 30s. So we want to do something to link those 20s and 30s together and help them apply their faith to everything in life. And so we started a website called Threads, and Threads is about drawing all the different parts of your life together. And so every day when you go there, there's some intriguing, inspiring story of how your faith connects to everyday life. And so we'd love for you to take a look at that. If some of you are good at writing, particularly if you're interested in things like film or politics or music or the arts, we'd love to hear from you, because we want to recruit a whole movement of young adults who are passionate about their faith and passionate about life, and getting them writing, speaking, videoing, creative graphic design about those kind of issues. So please come and talk to me if you'd like to know more about that. But that's just 2 things that Evangelical Alliance is doing.
Let's just welcome Krish, and then we're going to pray for him. Father, thank you for your call on Krish's life, and thank you for the way in which you stood in his heart some of the challenges and need of this generation. Pray, Lord, as he works with EA and seeks to network churches together across this nation for mission, come by your Spirit. Come, Holy Spirit. May he sense that fresh anointing, even being with us here tonight. May he not only bless us, but may he be a blessing and experience that blessing himself. Come now, Lord, I pray. Come by your Spirit and quicken in him that real sense of your word for this evening as he shares with us something about ultimate purpose, the sense of your call upon our lives. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Now, some of you are looking at me and you're thinking, where is that guy from? Well, you can probably tell from the colour of my skin and the fact that my name is Krish, which is short for Krishna. You could probably tell from that my grandfather was an Irishman. And it's true, you know. In India, a gamekeeper who was called in to shoot the wild tigers that were ravaging the village fell in love with a young Indian woman who was my grandmother. And they fell in love, got married, had babies. My mum was one of those babies. And she was born in India but moved to England. My father was born in Malaysia, but his father was born in Sri Lanka. Are you with me? You following? Anyway, those two got together, had a wonderful time, got married, had babies. I was one of those babies. And my wife, she is half English and half Welsh. We have 5 children, 3 of whom are birth children. 1 is adopted. She's from the Caribbean. And we have 1 foster son who is from Nigeria. So we consider ourselves the United Nations in our family. And let me just tell you a little bit about Martin, who was up here earlier in the red T-shirt. I became a Christian when I was at secondary school. I went to an all-boys comprehensive school, possibly the roughest school in Brighton. On my first day of school, some of the lads decided to set fire to a car. And when the flames caught, they didn't know what to do, so they dropped their trousers and tried to urinate the flames out. That was my first day at school. Our form room was a chemistry lab, which is a really bad place to have registration. And the teacher used to like to nip out for a quick smoke, cleverly leaving 30 teenage boys in charge of a chemistry lab. And for some reason, they used to store the acid, you know, hydrochloric acid, in squidgy bottles. And so acid fights were had across the desks. It was a complete mess. One morning, there was a lad called Nicky Leonard. Lucky for him, he wasn't the brightest spark in the room because what he tried to do was to suck the gas out of the gas tap and then light it on his breath. Praise be to the Lord, he didn't succeed. But I did challenge him once to see what would happen if you put a lighted splint in your ear while you had a cheek full of gas. And he didn't perform that experiment, so I'm not in prison and he's still alive. Now, into that environment, a 15-year-old boy, slightly overweight, struggling with acne, stood up and asked if he could give a notice to the class. And while the teacher was out on the smoking break, he made his announcements. And he said, boys, something amazing happened to me last night. Last night, I became a friend of God, and it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. And there live in my form room was the bravest thing I'd ever seen anyone do. And I tracked him down afterwards and I tried to find out why. Why would you do that? Why would you go public when you know you're going to get beaten up for your faith? And he said to me, Krish, if you knew the God that I met last night, you wouldn't be able to be silent about him. You'd have to speak about him. And that really struck me. And through his influence, as a lad called Steve, he's now a church leader in the north of England, and through Martin and another group of schools workers that were coming into my school, I was brought to faith and discipled, and I'm really grateful, both for Steve and for Martin and the others that had that input into my life. Now look, tonight I want to talk to you about total purpose. What is the purpose that God has for your life? How do you discern that? And how do you decide how to live into what God is calling you into? And to get into that subject, we're going to look at Romans 12 in a minute, but I want to start with a bit of cultural analysis. And I'm going to draw on 3 heroes. You could tell a lot about a culture by looking at its heroes. And as you look at these heroes, I want you to try and work out what is it that is similar or what is it that is different about them. If you're just arrived at Bristol University, this question is compare and contrast the 3 heroes I'm going to put in front of you. Okay, so here they are. Can we get it on the screen up there? here are the three heroes. Just in case you're not sure who they are, this is Jason Bourne. In the middle is Jack Bauer, and on the end is James Bond. A good week to be talking about James Bond. Adele's, just done her Skyfall soundtrack. I don't like it, but never mind. The rest of the film's going to be great, I'm sure. I would like, just with your neighbour, just for 60 seconds, try and compare and contrast these three heroes of our time. Over to you. Have a little chat with your neighbour. Can you do me a favour? Could you run with that when I need you? Okay, sorry I scared you with that funny noise. That was all my fault. Your technical crew are amazing. Okay, does anyone have a comment? If you've got a comment, put your hand up. Our worship leader, Chris Martin. What was your name again? Robin, it was just a great guitar riff that I really wanted to sing Fix You at that moment. It was just beautiful, loved it. Robin's going to run to you, and so if you could be as far away as possible from him, that would be great, because he had some bad food today, I'm sure. Anyone with an observation? Give us your hand. Over here, just here, Robin. Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry, there you go.
They all work for the government.
They all work for the government. Close. James Bond is definitely on Her Majesty's Secret Service, definitely, isn't he? And Jack Bauer works for CTU, the Counter-Terrorist Unit. But who does Jason Bourne work for? He used to work for the government. But he's transferred, okay, fine. So he works undercover for the government, but no longer. He's gone rogue, hasn't he? So, but good one, thank you. Someone else, you have to wave a lot because Robin apparently is short-sighted. Yeah, just in that general... Oh, there you go.
They're all trained killers?
They're all trained killers. Yeah, that is true. That's true, thank you. Any contrast? You've had some compares. Yeah, over here. That's all right.
Only James Bond is a serial womanizer.
Oh, good. Thank you, good. So if we bring a bit of gender studies critique to this, important... it's true, James Bond is a serial womanizer. He's kind of slowed down. I mean, it was 17 women in 17 seconds in some films. But, Jack Bauer is a one-woman guy, isn't he? Yeah, unless her name is Nina. And he's not really positive about her. But otherwise, he loves the women in his life. He's faithful to them. He loves his daughter. And Jason Bourne, he is definitely an egalitarian kind of guy, because none of these other two I don't think I've ever seen let a woman drive. But Jason Bourne does, so I'm kind of liking him. Good. Any other comment you want to make? Just two more, and then I'll move on.
They all have the initials JB?
They do. They all have the initials JB. James Bond, Jack Bauer, Jason Bourne, and tonight we're going to look at Jesus Ben Joseph. Good. One last one, and then someone wave at him. He's looking all lost and lonely. There's one all the way over here, Robin. You can do it. You can do it, mate.
Oh, Bond! Or James Bond?
You like the James Bond the most?
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of do. I get that. He is very handsome. I agree. I mean, you might want to do a technological critique, mightn't you? James Bond really isn't very much without his gadgets, without, the rocket-propelled grenade that comes out of his wrist or the submarine car. He's not really very much. Jack Bauer, he needs his gadgets. He needs his BlackBerry to be able to get the schematic diagrams to go into a building. But Jason Bourne doesn't need anything. He can kill you with a magazine. So you might understand that he's a kind of postmodern hero because he's transcended our reliance on technology and gadgets. But some would argue he is technology. He is a manufactured killing machine. Now, we could spend a lot of time on this. I'm a bit of a Jason Bourne fan, and another time invite me to come and give a talk about Jesus and Jason Bourne. But I want to focus on Jack Bauer. Jack Bauer is the only hero that my kids tell jokes about in the school playground. Did you know Jack Bauer can slam a revolving door? Did you know Jack Bauer can kill 2 stones with 1 bird? But I like Jack Bauer. He is a man of integrity. Let me tell you why. The premise behind the television show 24 is that you are following Jack Bauer in more or less real time when you factor out the advert breaks. More or less real time. You see him almost all the time in all sorts of boring as well as super exciting situations. I mean, there are some inconsistencies in that Jack Bauer's BlackBerry never runs out of battery. He never actually eats any food or sleeps, and I don't think he's ever been to the toilet. But apart from that, you are following his life. There is no distinction between Jack Bauer's public life and his private life. Everything is in front of the camera. That is what it means to have integrity. Now, sadly, for many Christians, that isn't true. We don't have a joined-up life. We have a public life and a public persona and a private persona. I remember when I arrived at university, I went to Warwick University, probably the nicest university near Coventry. And when I was studying there, I had a plan. My plan was to look like the happiest person on the university campus. And I would try to smile all the time. And I tried to fall asleep smiling so that I would develop laughter lines. So that when I woke up, even if I didn't feel happy, I just looked like I was. I thought that was the way I needed to commend the gospel, by living a happy life in front of everybody else. But the Bible doesn't call us to that kind of facade. The Bible calls us to integrity, to living out loud the truth about God in the good times as well as the bad times. For some of us, we've divided our lives into the spiritual and the secular. There's who we are in church, and there's who we are the whole rest of the week. And Jack Bauer, he challenges us to say, no, it's about who you are 24 hours a day. So I want to drill into what integrity looks like and to how we live that out as men and women of purpose. And so I guess, quick book plug, it's actually not on the bookstore. I wrote a book because I'm passionate about this idea. It's called 24, and if you want to, I suppose, develop a sense of whole life discipleship, this book might help you. There are others that can do it as well. But there's a chapter on sleeping. How do you sleep to the glory of God? There's a chapter on, and some of you students seem well practiced on that. You know, it's amazing you got up in time for tonight. I appreciate you being here. But how do you do it? How do you sleep enough? Or how do you sleep not too much in order to glorify God? How about commuting? How do you travel, whether it's by bicycle or whether it's by train? How do you travel to the glory of God? What about food and eating? Who you share food with and who you cook for? How do you do that to the glory of God? That's the idea behind a book. A whole chapter on food and cooking and sleeping and shopping and watching television. How do you do that to the glory of God? But Romans 12 is a great passage to do it from. So let's have a look at Romans chapter 12. And if you've got a Bible, bring it out. If you've got a Bible on your phone, bring it out. If you haven't, maybe look on the screen. Here is the Apostle Paul writing. This is the 12th chapter. We might need to talk about the other 11 chapters briefly before we get here, but here we go. Chapter 12. Therefore, in light of everything he's told us so far about Jesus and about the gospel, Paul has told us that none of us, whether we were born into a Jewish family or whether we were born as Gentiles far away from God, none of us have lived as our consciences have told us. None of us have responded to God in creation and worshipped him as we ought to have done. Some of us even knew what God wanted, but we still didn't live that way. So all of us have fallen short of the glory of God. But the good news is God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Very rarely will someone die for a good man, but Jesus laid down his life for the ungodly. It wasn't because you were good enough that you're welcomed into God's family. It's in spite of all the things that you've done wrong, God still welcomes you. That's important, and particularly tonight if you're someone investigating the Christian faith, that you know it's not that you need to be good enough to be acceptable to God. Let me tell you what happened. I'm a dad, I told you, and my oldest son, I think he must have been about 5 years old. And I was doing like I'm doing today. I was preaching at an evening service, having preached at a morning service before. And we went for a walk, my family and I, around the lake, and I wouldn't have enough time to go home to get changed, so I was wearing my best clothes. I was attempting to look as cool as Philip Ginnardo. And so I had a lovely shirt on, really nicely done, and, good pair of trousers, all sorted. And my son decided he was going to run around this lake instead of walk. And he ran and ran and ran, and he ran so hard that he fell headlong into a muddy puddle. And what went in was a little boy. What came out was the creature from the Black Lagoon. He didn't look like a boy, he just looked like a blob. And you could just see some little eyes. And do you know what he said? He said, "Daddy!" And then the tears were kind of dripping down his face, kind of leaving a trail where the mud had used to be. Now, what did that little boy want most in the world? A hug. What was the last thing in the world I wanted to give him? What did I do? I patted him on the head. "Oh, there, it's fine. You'll be okay. Keep your distance." No way. I enveloped him in a hug, and he threw his arms around me. It was a great moment. It was a great moment of the grace of God. I tasted a little bit of what it means for someone to come into God's family. God says, you're messed up. You've done things you know to be wrong. You've done things, you haven't done things that you should have done. But if you cry out to me, you cry out to me as your Father in heaven, I will welcome you with open arms. Now, I peeled off my son after an appropriate amount of time. And there on my nice white shirt was a lovely imprint of a little son hugging his father. Now, I loved him. I loved him enough to hug him in spite of whatever he came with. But if you met my son, he's 13 now, if he was still covered in that same mud that he had been on that day 8 years ago, would that show you what a great father I was, that I love him just the way he is? No. I love my son enough that after I'd told him how much I'd love him, showed him how much I love him, I then wanted to clean him up so that he could be all that he was supposed to be, so he could shine as a little boy rather than just be covered in the dirt that he'd come to me in. And I guess that's a little bit about what the gospel is according to Paul in the book of Romans. He says God demonstrates his own love for you in this. While you were still sinners, God sent his son to die for you. He welcomes you into the family. But Romans says he puts his spirit in us, and that spirit begins to transform us. And actually not just us, that spirit of God begins to transform the whole of creation. And the whole of creation is yearning and groaning, longing for everything to be put right. That will happen one day. And this is all part of God's massive plan that he purposed before the ages. And the whole thing with Israel, that was part of the plan too. God always intended that everybody, whether Jew or Gentile, slave or free, would be brought into one family because of God's Spirit living in us, transforming us to be like Jesus. That's where he's up to when you come to chapter 12. In light of all this, knowing this incredible grace of God, you have a response to make. I have a response to make. Therefore, I urge you, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good and pleasing and perfect will. Having received the mercy of God, the Spirit of God drives us to want to offer ourselves to God. Did you notice in that passage which bit of our lives we're supposed to be offering to God? He didn't say, please give me 20 minutes every morning in a prayer time and just an hour and a quarter on a Sunday night. And if you're really, really committed, give me Thursday evenings as well. God says, offer your bodies. All that's in this sack of flesh, all that you are, offer me that. Because that is what I count as spiritual worship. For some people, spiritual worship, when you even hear the word spiritual in your head, you're thinking of a man or a woman on top of a mountain dressed in long flowing silk, holding their hands like this and pretending the world isn't here and meditating up to God. And to be honest, sometimes when we worship, that's what we think is important. We close our eyes in worship. We cut out the distractions. It's about being lifted from this moment into the presence of God. Paul says that is just one tiny sliver of your worship. Your worship is not just what you do with your mouth. Offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. Now, I love it. As I was talking to Rob this afternoon, I love the vision of this church. It's not just that you have a full building, but you're trying to fill this city with light. You're trying to show by the way that you live, by the way that you work, that Jesus is Lord, not just of the church, but of the whole of creation. That's why it matters what happens in politics. That's why it matters what you study on your courses. That's why it matters how you raise your kids. All of life is an opportunity to worship the living God. But too often we separate them out into tiny bits. We don't give God 24 hours a day. We give him a few minutes. And this is probably the reason we've got a huge problem in the UK, particularly amongst your generation. Let me put a stat on the screen. This is the Titanic. The Titanic was an absolute disaster. 68% of all the passengers on the Titanic died in the sea due to an iceberg hit and then a massive flood on the ship. 68%. That is one of the world's worst maritime disasters. But track with me this. If you went 20 years back in time and visited the average Sunday school in the average church in the UK, and you found 10 children aged between 0 and 9, all singing the songs and praying and getting involved with the life of the church. 10 children. Now zoom forward 20 years to today. How many children from that 10 are still connected with God and his church? The answer is 3. At the moment in the UK, across the UK, we are seeing 70% losses of young people transitioning from childhood faith to adult faith. There's a massive drop-off, as we heard earlier, when people come up to university. There's an even bigger one when you leave. It's upon us, the church, particularly in university context, to equip young people to live for God, not just at the church meeting, not just in the quiet time, not just in our prayers, but in the whole of life. What does it mean to be a student to the glory of God? It means more than just doing evangelism in your lunch break, although that matters. It means studying chemistry or ethics or medieval studies to the glory of God. Now, part of the problem is we can wave our finger and say, the young people of today, it's all their fault. Do you know what? Young people do what they see us doing. My adopted daughter, she's 6 years old. And sometimes we have the privilege of having breakfast together as a family. And one morning I was running late for a train, and so I'm there, I'm eating my breakfast, I'm eating my shreddies, and there's a bit of milk left in the bottom. And you get that kind of moral dilemma. Is it better to be late for work or to be polite? And I went for, okay, I drank from the bowl. It was a disgusting moment. I drank from the bowl. Next day, I'm having breakfast with my 6-year-old daughter. She's reached that moral dilemma. She's reached the end of her shreddies, but there's still some milk left in the bottom. What did she do? I was appalled. Who taught you these kind of manners? I'm glad I'm not bringing you with me to the civilized town of Bristol, because I'd be ashamed of you. How dare you drink your breakfast cereal like that? Where did you get such an idea? At that moment, there were 6 small little fingers from 6 different children all pointing at me. If our young people are struggling to integrate faith in everyday life, do you know what? It's our fault, because we're struggling to integrate faith and everyday life. Let me move us on. I want to give you, I suppose, a challenge. Paul says in this passage, Romans 12, he says 3 things that are really important. He says, offer your bodies. This is your act of spiritual worship. And he tells us that we need to renew our mind. Did you see how holistic that is? What you do with your body matters to God. It isn't just about closing your eyes and having an out-of-body experience. It's what you do with your body that matters to God. Because that itself is spiritual. Your body is a spiritual temple of God. So what you do with it is part of your worship. But the way you know what to do with your body, the way that you discern God's will for your life, is through the renewing of your mind. There are many Christians that struggle to put these 3 elements together. Some Christians, it's all about this. Worship, 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 wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Other people, it's all about this. Must work harder, got to get busy. What else can I do with my body? How else can I serve people? And other people, it's all about this. My head needs more information. Give me information. Make me a better Christian by teaching me harder and harder. I want to devour books. That's all it's about. But Paul says, no, I want you to put all 3 together. I want you to worship me with your body, because that is spiritual worship, and you need to know what to do by renewing your mind. This morning I was talking at a church. I said, look, each one of us is probably weak in one of those areas. Maybe you are all this. It's all about spiritual worship. How can you translate that into what you do with your body and what you do with your mind? Or maybe you are one of these intellectual types, and it's all about, I just go from church to church, devouring more teaching, reading Christian books, listening to podcasts, just want to fill my brain. Paul says, no, you need to offer your bodies as living sacrifices. We need to put all 3 together. If we do, we'll develop the habit of knowing how to please God. Paul says, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world. Don't let the world culture drive you. Be transformed. When I was growing up, there was a game on the, man, this is really old. It was a computer called a ZX Spectrum. And some of you don't know what that is. It was cutting edge. You know, it had the same amount of memory as your shoelace does, and probably about the same amount of processing power as your digital watch. But it was the best we had. Nowadays, it's probably useful as a frisbee. But the ZX Spectrum had one killer game. It was called Lemmings. Lemmings was a game where you had to take these tiny little creatures and stop them falling off of cliffs or into boiling water by building bridges for them. Because wherever the lead lemming went, all the other lemmings would follow. And so your job was to save the lemmings. And it always was prone to failure, because at one stage or another, you'd run out of enough hands to be in the right place. Now, if you like, our culture are a herd of lemmings. They're going in a certain direction. People living their lives, working hard at jobs they hate, to spend money they don't have on stuff they don't need, to please people they don't even like. That's our culture, a consumer, materialistic culture. Paul says, don't let the culture press you into its mold. Don't be the same. Now, I saw this cartoon in a magazine not long ago. Can you stick it on the screen? Can you see it? If you can't quite see that, there's a herd of lemmings running into the sea about to be drowned. But there's one lemming. Can you spot him? There's one lemming. He's got his lifebelt on. So if all the others drown, don't worry. He's okay. He'll float happily. Now, sadly, that is not a bad picture of the church across the UK at the moment. And there are wonderful examples of people that are living differently. But for many of us, our dreams and our ambitions, our goals are exactly the same as our neighbours who aren't yet Christians. But all we've got is a lifebelt. Jesus, you know, I can do exactly as everybody else does, but don't worry, when I die, I'll go to heaven. God says, no, I want you not to be pressed into the mould of this culture. but allow the gospel values to transform your brain so that you change what you do with your body so that you bring glory to him. Then you will know what God's will is for your life. It's allowing that process to go on and on. And I'd like to tell you there's just one quick course you need to go on and it's all sorted. But that's not how it works. The way it works is a little bit like this. Whenever I go onto my computer, it asks me for a password. You have that? You got your computer locked in that way? And I can type my password. I can type my password in the dark with my eyes closed. But if you asked me to draw a map of my computer keyboard of where all the bits are, I couldn't tell you. My fingers have a memory of their own. It's called muscle memory. It can type without knowing the layout. It's an automatic response because I've done it over and over and over and over again. I've programmed myself to be able to type. Now God says, look, if you want to know how to make decisions, practice this every day. Offer your bodies as living sacrifices to God and have your mind renewed. Live the Christian life out. Make decisions for Jesus every day. How you travel to work, who you speak to in the office, what you cook, who you share food with. Live the Christian life day by day. Then you will develop an instinct so that you know what God's will is for your life. You won't hear prophetic voices at every turn. Sometimes by God's grace, he does that. But most of the time, it's about developing wise, godly habits to live for God. And then almost instinctively, you're in the flow of what God is doing and what his Spirit wants us to be doing in the world. So practice. If you're a student, how do you know how to spend your money when you become rich and famous? Do you know how? Give your money wisely now when you haven't got much of it. When you're a young mum, how do you know how to help your children to become more godly? Do you know how? By practicing every day to be more godly yourself. It's infectious. If you're a businessman, how will you know when you need to blow the whistle on a company that's doing something evil? Do you know how? By being honest with the small things, with your expenses, with your credit card bills. You practice, you develop a godly set of habits, virtues, and you will know how to test and approve what God's will is. Let me close with one last story. I had the privilege to travel to Haiti to do a fundraising video for a project working amongst very young children who needed somewhere safe to be and some medical attention they could get. And we had the privilege of visiting a school. And in that school, I got to sit with 3 8-year-old little children. And I just chatted to them, and I said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the little boy, he said, I want to be a soldier. I thought, oh, I know why. But I just asked him, why do you want to be a soldier? He says, well, Haiti had a terrible earthquake, and millions of people died. And the people that helped pull people out of the rubble, the people that brought security, were the soldiers. So I want to be a soldier when I grow up because I want Haiti to be a safer place. Wow. Next little girl. What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a doctor. Oh, okay, why is that? Well, when the earthquake hit, the doctors were the ones that were helping people to be healthy. So I want to be just like that. Third little girl, 8 years old. Okay, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a gynecologist. And at this moment, I'm thinking, wait, I didn't find out what a gynecologist was until I was married and we were 9 months pregnant. And I was watching, the Alien film happen in front of me live. As a squirming baby was anyway, you don't want to know. But this 8-year-old girl wants to be a gynecologist. I don't even know what a gynecologist is when I was your age. Why do you want to do that? Because Haiti has a problem. Haiti has a problem with lots of children dying young, and I want to help. I was moved. By the grace of God, I get to meet lots and lots of people that are making career choices, whether they're university students or people reaching a kind of midlife career option. And I've never heard anyone articulate a sense of vocation the way those young people did. What do you want to be when you finish university? I don't know. Why did you choose the subject that you did? I liked it. What are you thinking of doing with the rest of your life? Well, I'm bored of my job. I want to do something different. Don't let the world press you into its mold, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. In light of God's mercy, offer your bodies, your whole life, your dreams, your ambitions, all that we are, offer them to God as a living sacrifice. God, it's not about me, it's about you. Here I am. Use me. Amen.